Hi, my name is Eric Skoglund. I'm the debate coach at Olathe Northwest High School. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with some optional bonus information about some information that you might find helpful in judging policy debate. However, I want to preface this by saying our debaters are trained to present to a wide variety of audiences, some of whom know a lot about debate, and some of whom know nothing about debate. Students learn debate through the course of a semester, and then they take that class year over year over year. I promise you that even 15 minutes of this presentation won't have you nearly as knowledgeable about debate as they are. That's okay. The key thing about debate is that they are communicating the ideas to you in a way that is understandable. The structure of each speech is usually divided into several different sections where they're talking about different arguments or parts of the round. Those are set up by the 1AC and the 1NC. The 1AC is the first affirmative constructive. It is usually divided into several sections. Usually these are called either observations or contentions. Those terms are used interchangeably and they kind of mean the same thing. The 1NC, the first negative constructive, will be also divided into several new arguments they're bringing into the debate. Some of those arguments may be on case, where they are responding directly to points made in the affirmative's case. Others of them may be off case, which are additional reasons to reject the advocacy of the affirmative for one reason or another. Sometimes the 2NC might also choose to read some new argumentation, but more commonly, it is the case that everything would be introduced in the 1NC. The C stands for constructive, so both teams can bring up new arguments throughout that first half of the debate in the constructives. Each subsequent speech should hopefully remain fairly organized as they move through the various components of each debate. The different observations from the case, and the arguments from the negative that might include topicality, might include some disadvantages, might include a counterplan, and might also include responding to some of the affirmative. Additionally, after each constructive, there is a period of 3 minutes of cross-examination in which the student who just spoke is cross-examined by a member of the other team. These should be taking place with both students standing up, directing their words towards you rather than towards each other. Some teams might ask if open cross-ex is acceptable to you. This just means that the other two students can participate in cross-examination as the need arises. This is up to you and perhaps up to the host tournament if they have any guidelines for you on that question. The primary thing that the affirmative is trying to do is to provide some kind of a case for change, and to justify that change. The affirmative is the team in the debate who knew exactly what the debate was going to be about before they came into the room. Through the year, we're all talking about one broad resolution, but the affirmative will have some specific instance of that resolution that they're talking about. Because of that, the affirmative is often going to seem more prepared than the negative team, and as a result of that, we have what's called the burden of proof, where the affirmative really has to convince you of the things they're saying in order to make a case for change. Another way to think about it is that the status quo, the world we live in now, is considered innocent until the affirmative can prove it's guilty and need of change. The negative might have a variety of approaches to try and convince you that the affirmative's case for change has not been met. They might argue that the status quo is already addressing the problem the affirmative isolates. They might say that the affirmative's approach doesn't work. They might say that there are other disadvantages to the affirmative plan that outweigh the advantages presented in the 1AC. Or some negative teams might offer a counterplan, a different approach, which might be a better way to move forward. Our debaters will be, or ought to be, taking notes about the debate. The image here gives you an example of what some of those notes might look like. You as the judge are also encouraged to take notes about the debate in some way that tries to help you track the debate. Most of our students choose to use a separate sheet of paper for each argument, so each observation or contention and each off-case position by the negative team gets its own sheet of paper so that way they can be clean and organized. You can, of course, do whatever makes the most sense to you as you kind of learn about this activity yourself. There are several terms you might encounter. One hopes the debaters will explain these to you, but there are some that I've kind of isolated on the next couple of slides that you might want to have a background knowledge of ahead of time. This first set of topics are what are called by many coaches the stock issues. Now, what is a specific stock issue depends from coach to coach, so you will hear these, some or all of these, referenced by teams who are making more of a stock issues approach to their argumentation. Inherency makes the claim that there exists a problem in the status quo and that it is not being resolved by itself. Closely related to inherency is the concept of harms. Not only is there a problem, but this problem is having some real impact on people. Solvency is an argument about whether or not the affirmative is able to resolve the problem that they isolate. There's no sense in presenting a problem if you don't have some way to address it, at least make it better, if not solve it completely. Topicality is an argument about whether or not what the affirmative is proposing to do fits within this year's policy debate resolution. Advantages are reasons why the affirmative's plan is good, why the affirmative believes they lead to some desirable consequences. The negative might counter with disadvantages, which will sound very similar, but there are reasons why the affirmative plan ends up in negative consequences. Within a disadvantage, teams are likely to reference a few parts of a disadvantage. The link, which is the connection between the affirmative's proposal and the negative's argument. In other words, the link establishes why this disadvantage is relevant to the debate in front of you. The impact is the bad thing that happens as a result of the disadvantage coming true. It is the reason why you care about the disadvantage, and it is the argument that the negative is making that that impact is so bad, we would want to avoid it and not do the plan. The uniqueness of a disadvantage is a claim about the status quo. A disadvantage tells a story of some negative outcome we might be on if we choose the affirmative's path. What the uniqueness makes the argument of is that voting negative, staying with the status quo, does not lead us down that same path. Some teams may also run counterplans. A couple of terms you might hear in counterplans are the net benefit, which is a reason why the counterplan is better than the affirmative's plan. You might also hear the affirmative introduce the argument of a perm or permutation. This is just an argument that we could do the plan and the counterplan at the same time, and so the counterplan is not really relevant to the debate. Topicality is specifically an argument that the negative team will run. The affirmative does not have to, in their first speech, explain why they fit into the topic. It is assumed that they do, unless the negative makes this a point. The negative makes this argument if they believe there is one or more terms in the debate resolution which are not met by the affirmative's proposal. Topicality often sounds to inexperienced judges as though teams are whining or perhaps weren't being prepared adequately. But topicality is ultimately a question of the fairness of a debate, and therefore the education we're able to get out of that debate. The reason topicality exists as an argument is because without it, the affirmative could just do anything, and the negative wouldn't necessarily be able to predict or prepare for what that affirmative approach would be. The analogy that I often use when explaining topicality to our novice students is that it's like the judge in a court case finding that they don't actually have jurisdiction. If you get a speeding ticket on the Kansas side of the state line, you probably aren't going to go to court in Missouri to resolve it. That judge would not have jurisdiction. Similarly, the idea is, if the affirmative's plan is not within this year's debate resolution, that you probably do not have the jurisdiction to vote affirmative and find that it's a good idea. A very simple approach to debate that is used by judges of a variety of experience levels, even very experienced coaches and former debaters, is the approach called the policymaker approach. This asks you a simple question. You compare two worlds. Would you prefer to live in a world where the affirmative's plan came to pass? Or would you prefer to stay in the status quo? If the affirmative's plan is better, then you should vote affirmative. If you would prefer to stick to the status quo and not make change, then you should vote negative. If the negative runs a counterplan, then that becomes your question instead. Would I rather have the plan or the negative's counterplan? A lot of the argumentation in a debate will have some bearing on this question. Do you prefer the plan or the negative approach, whether that be a counterplan or the status quo? In all of this discussion, there have been a lot of terms, a lot of ideas. Rest assured, the best of the debaters you will see have the ability to explain these ideas in the detail that you will need in order to make a confident decision. There's by no means any way I can do in a 10-minute video the entirety of a debate curriculum. So even though you still probably don't feel super prepared, rest assured, our debater's job is to make it so that you understand what's happening in the round. If they don't do that, that's not your fault, that's their fault. Again, the judge is always the final arbiter. Thank you.